Okay, hello. This is A11. Starting the week of January 11th. I'm actually taping Sunday evening, January the 10th. Welcome to a new semester of me talking to myself. Most Sunday, I'll tape the lecture on Sunday nights. Usually post it Sunday night or at least Monday morning. And I'll have an open classroom on a Wednesday at 11 p.m. So that means I open the classroom. If you're there at 11, sorry, a.m. morning, you can come online and ask me direct questions. You could chat, ask me questions in the chat. I will tape that too. So if you're not able to actually attend at 11, you can listen to whatever discussion. It's not a lecture. I don't have a planned lecture for the open classroom. It's more like a communal office hour. But there will be information. I'll elaborate on things. I'll answer your questions. If you want to get in there and ask your own question in person, you'll need to be there, but you won't miss the discussion if you're not able to be there at 11. I know there's some bizarre time zone issues. Not really bizarre, just a fact that if you're in India or China, that could be the middle of the night. So I'm taping everything I can. I will answer questions at leonardgary@hotmail.com anytime. I'll occasionally be posting discussion possibilities, extra credit possibilities. Those will be under the discussion section. I have a printed lecture, so to speak, that accompanies each of my taped lectures. They're not identical. I tend to elaborate and embroider what's in print. One thing you can do if and when you have time is they're in order: lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3. You can make your own book if you want. If you want to have a hard copy, just download and print each. That can be useful around midterm and final time because then you can highlight and things like that. Obviously, with the taped lecture, you have the benefit of rewinding, stopping, watching it again. So the note-taking, I think, is under less pressure because it's not the case that if you don't get it down, I've said it, it's done, you've missed it. A word on note-taking with my lecture style: the best thing to do, and especially now that you can always go back with the tape, write down what makes an impression on you. Don't necessarily struggle to write down things you don't know what, you're not really sure what I'm talking about. I have a very spirally lecture style, which means that I revisit. It's not a circle. I don't just repeat myself, at least I try not to. I circle back to something and then discuss it at a higher level, kind of a video game concept where you level up. So I may say an idea, say idea Z, and then I'll be talking about idea Z again, but not just to say it, but I've said enough so I can now show you more about that particular idea. You do not need to have taken A10 to take A11. A10 is not a prerequisite to A11. But the world being what it is, I can't pretend that the events that we discussed in A10 have no bearing on the events we'll discuss in A11. However, anything that I consider relevant to A11 from A10 will be brought up in A11. And I won't be drawing on A10 at all. If I said something in A10 that doesn't make it into A11, it's not going to show up on the exam. So that's how I kind of thread that needle. Ideally, take both, take them in the order of A10 and A11, but it's not an ideal world. A lot of you guys take this for the humanities credit. Sometimes you only need half a credit, so you don't have to take both. Lots of students intend to take only one half and then come back for another. And so it's also the case that you can take A10 after you've taken A11. I think quite a few have done that. And what you'll find then is that you'll just see the foundation that simply gets highlighted in A11 will be explored. And of course, they're completely different works, roughly from 1890 to 1940. And here we're kicking off with a play written around 1948, Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett, performed in 1951, and so it's right. It's a post World War II play. And A10, A11 breaks really at the moment of after World War II. We discussed what happened with World War I and A10, and in a sense it happened again, only worse. World War II was worse than World War I. World War I first introduced doubt that technology was the new salvational discourse, that yes, there was a diminishment of faith. Yes, there was as Nietzsche would put it, the death of God, or the idea of God. But science, so we thought, Darwin, among others, Freud, had Karl Marx, they stepped in and gave a secular equivalent of the former sort of sacred concept. And the movement roughly was from a sense of the cosmic and the eternal to the earthly and the secular. So science did really well. Science doesn't require faith. One would probably say it requires evidence. Although one could make a case we still have to have faith in evidence to a certain degree. But science tries to make sure that little faith as possible is necessary. So experiments should be something that two people on opposite sides of the world can duplicate and get the same result. The idea of science is you don't have to worry about faith, doubt. The issue is evidence, lack of evidence. It's much more secular. It's much, instead of being about our place in the cosmos, it's about our place in the natural order. And that did seem to not only save us from the vacuum of having suddenly no God, no faith, but it also seemed to give us more control. Instead of God knowing the world and we trusting God that he knows the world, he knows what's best for us. And if we listen or find out a way to listen, his path can then be our path, which is not our path, it's just us discovering his path for ourselves. But with the rise of science, so we move from the age of faith to the age of science, roughly around 1890. The downside of the age of science is it's accompanied with the age of anxiety. So age of faith, age of science, age of belief and doubt, age of anxiety. So there was something like anxiety in the age of faith, but mostly it was a pendulum swing between belief and doubt. I believe in God. I don't believe in God. I need to get back to God. I've drifted away from God. But with the issue of where the dominant discourse no longer really asks whether there's a God or not, then instead of going back and forth from a faith that's a relief to a doubt that's very uncomfortable, we just are vaguely uncomfortable all the time. We don't have to worry that we're damned, but we also don't have a hard time figuring out what it would mean to be saved. So instead of being saved or damned, we tend to think of ourselves as either enlightened or ignorant in some way. So it becomes much more of an epistemology, much more about knowing and much less about believing. Although Emily Dickinson, 1860, I think, found that she had a great little couplet where she talks about microscopes and telescopes, and she says microscopes and telescopes are a fine invention for men who can see, but God is a relief in an emergency. So, and I think I might have gotten one word wrong, but anyway, that's off the top of my head. So telescopes are a fine invention, microscopes are a fine invention, as long as you're discussing the division of a cell or whatever. But if you're in a personal crisis, they're not going to help you, and that's when you're going to miss faith. So in some ways, it's a relief to not have to worry about whether you're saved or damned, and it seems to free you up to control your own destiny. But that's a very empirical point of view. It's a very materialistic point of view. And the dark night of the soul, if you will, is no longer conventional to turn to God and say, "Save me! I'm at the bottom of a well." You're at the bottom of a well, and we turn to psychology, not theology. And psychology has various forms of trying to figure out why you're miserable. There's certainly lots of pharmaceuticals, some of them effective, but even the use of an effective antidepressant begs the question of why you're depressed. It can help you with the symptoms of depression, and that can be an asset, especially if you use the relief to figure out what's depressing you. The difficulty is when we double down on wanting science to do it all for us, almost as though it were a god. We want the antidepressant to just make us feel good no matter what's going on. All that it can do is mask the symptoms of what our situation produces. So it's like a meme I saw the other day that said, anxious, depressed, maybe it's capitalism. So instead of assuming that everything is just some malfunction within you, some dysfunction, you're in a dysfunctional world. Capitalism, it's not, to say that capitalism is dysfunctional is to state the obvious. It doesn't mean we should replace it. It just means it's also dysfunctional. I mean, families are often dysfunctional. It doesn't necessarily mean that they ruin the children. It's very little is functional, actually, or all the time. So, but we're in this age that privileges what I've called the myth of perfection in A10, where everything it can get better. So the iPhone 7 is better than the iPhone 8, and it puts a lot of, we have a blind spot about this dysfunction. We either demonize it completely, and so a dysfunctional family is terrible and it wrecks everyone's lives, or it's a functional family and everybody is just brilliant. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. Everybody deals with dysfunction. The problem is that in this, what I'll be calling the postmodern era after World War II versus the modern era, is the modern era was still looking to see if they could restore confidence in some kind of overarching order. Postmodernism doesn't do that anymore. In fact, it assumes there is no overarching order. There never was. And so postmodernism, which links up with existentialism, and we'll be talking about that, says that the only thing we know for sure is that we exist. And the reason we know we exist is that we suffer, because nobody willingly suffers. So the fact that we suffer in a way that we didn't seek means that we exist. Now, that's not what Descartes said. Descartes famously said, I think, therefore I am. Now, that was the beginning of modern science, because the age of faith said, I believe, therefore I may be saved. The emphasis was not on this world at all. You believed in order to go to heaven, in order to live forever, in order for your soul to survive. So when Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, we can see the beginning of science, but we also see the turn toward the secular and away from the eternal, away from the cosmic, and toward being whatever is here. There is no elsewhere. This isn't some waiting room. Although Waiting for Godot shows the nostalgia for that, because the tramps are waiting for Godot every day, over and over again. What they're missing, they're very nostalgic for the idea of heaven, for the idea that there's a world beyond this one. And they would rather keep waiting for someone to come from beyond the world, even if that never seems to fail every day. And we only see 2 days in Godot, but there's no reason to believe that this wouldn't go on forever. If you stayed in your seat after Waiting for Godot was over and waited till the evening performance began again the next evening, it would still be full circle. There is no end. Waiting for Godot doesn't end. You just leave the theater. There's a lot of that in postmodernism. There's no beginning, there's no middle, there's no end. You can't map anything. Well, you can, but it's false. It's really interesting that Google Maps has photographed every square inch of the world, and it would seem that we've mapped everything. But when it comes to understanding our lives, we have less and less maps. The sacred scripture attempts to be a map. So we have a lot of physical maps. We can Google things. We don't get lost. Some lady I never heard of will come over my radio and say, take a left. And might as well be divine for all I know. And of course, she doesn't seem to be infallible, because I wound up lost even when I did what she told me to. And that's always a weird feeling, like, okay, now what am I going to do? So I had faith in Google, this lady, and now I know that she doesn't know, but I don't either. So how do I get reoriented? Um, so I called this the loss of transcendental certitude in A10. The loss of faith was a loss that there was something above and beyond this world that knew everything, that was perfect. And weirdly enough, we took the perfection of a presumed God and we inserted it into commodity culture and science. Now it seems to be science that is either perfect or making its way to perfection. So science is very big about talking about advances, talking about breakthroughs, talking about what I call the myth of innovation, that everything that is so new is also better, and that we're just slowly moving toward perfection. Uh, but we're not. We're not so different than the 15th century, the 16th century. I mean, granted, they didn't have iPhones, but they had the same loves, hates, problems, mortality. If you look at technology, 500 years ago seems like light years away. I just realized I have to plug this thing in. Speaking of technology, and in the sense of tech, if you think of the history of time as the history of technology, then time is something that moves on. But if you think of time, if you think of the history of consciousness, there's actually no such thing as time. The Earth has been turning in what we call it 24 hours. It takes 365 days. That's just physics. That's not what time it is. We can map that. We can map a clock like the one behind me. You notice I have the clock and the cosmos. Just my idea of a joke. But and I'm caught between the two, and so are you. But there is no time, and there is no identity. Identity is a mapping of consciousness. Constructing a self is creating a functional relationship to our own confusion about our existence. The self protects us from confusion. It used to be the soul that protected us from confusion, and it did that by saying, if you're lost, think about the divine spark of God that's in you, and pray to God to help your soul. But now we have this self, so now we don't pray to God to help our soul. We go to Indigo to get a self-help book to help ourself. What's wrong with us? It's got nothing to do with the transcendent certitude. It has to do with strategies and new self-help books. Self-help books like He's Just Not That Into You, which is probably, I can tell when you've read the title of that book, you've read the book. I mean, you can read the whole book if you want, but it's making the point that the problem isn't him or her, it's you pretending that someone likes you when they don't, or at least not that way, and you don't want to know that, so you refuse to know that, and you go buy a self-help book to figure out why you can't figure out how they're loving you, and then it doesn't occur to you that the reason you can't figure out how they're loving you is that they're not. It's amazing how far we'll go to not face a truth we don't want to know. So shift from faith to science, the shift from soul to self, the shift from the loss of transcendental certitude to empirical science as certainty, the shift from a belief doubt cycle to just a straight anxiety, a vague sense of dread, but we don't know why. And we have no way of connecting it to anything. Like being in doubt is not the same as being anxious. Being in doubt means you try to find reason to believe in again, either what you believed in before or something new. The problem with anxiety is it doesn't participate in the belief doubt cycle. So you're neither in doubt nor do you believe with anxiety. Anxiety is a very hard emotion to tolerate because it has no clue. It gives no clue in the way that it feels as to what you should do. It's not like fear, where you can figure out what you're afraid of. It's not like happiness, where you can figure out why you're happy. You're anxious because you don't know why. It's completely circular. And so what do you need if you're anxious? Well, maybe you need a soda. Maybe Coke is it. Coca-Cola is the advertisement to counteract anxiety. You don't know what it is. You don't know who you are. So have a drink. Have Coke, because Coke is it. Whatever the objective correlative to your anxiety, which you can't figure out, don't worry about it, because it's Coke. It's not Coke. Coke even knows it's not Coke. But it doesn't matter because it functions as something you can do. T.S. Eliot says, I measure out my life with coffee spoons. Well, why not Diet Cokes or Diet Pepsis. Punctuate your day with something that claims that it is it. It's completely circular, as is the logo for Coca-Cola or Nike. A native variation of that, saying just do it. What? Do it. It's just it's just a kinetic equivalent of the soda. And so instead of being it, you do it. Coke claims it will help you be it. Nike claims it will help you do it. And in either cases, it gets done, but nobody ever says what it is. And one of the big shifts in postmodernism from modernism is modernism still sought to figure out again what it means to be. I think, therefore I am. Postmodernism turns that on its head, and it's no longer we exist first, and then we make up myths about who we are, and then we pretend those myths occurred before we existed. And that, in a way, the theological did that too. We had the Garden of Eden story, Adam and Eve, and they ate the apple and they got kicked out. This explains the cosmos and our position in it. We don't have sacred scripture in postmodernism. We have retroactive myths that we try to believe occurred before we did. So the self is a retroactive myth. We make it up, just like we impose time on the cosmos. It's 2:30. No, it's not. It's not 2:30. The Earth is in some point where it's been for the last 4 billion years. And so you're meeting your friend at 2:30, and each of you know that's that point of but really the Earth is a circle. It rotates in a circle, and it goes around the sun in a circle. There's no beginning, there's no middle, there's no end. It's unmappable, and yet we've mapped it down to millionths of a second. And we've done that partly to correspond to our attempt to map ourselves, to map our existence. Theology used to map our existence for us. If God knew what our life meant, we didn't have to. We had to just try and figure that out by listening and praying and asking. That's gone. Now, our existence, we have to sort of be our own God. It's like when I'm in Sobeys the other day now, and they've got these self-checkouts. And I'm like, when did I get hired by Sobeys to pack my own groceries? And then wouldn't necessarily mind packing my own groceries, but somebody who used to get paid and who needs that money, I just took their job. I don't want their job. I won't use those damn things. Although the other night I went there and there were no actual checkouts people. There was just one woman standing there monitoring the 5 checkout units. So she wasn't going to check me out. She was going to watch me check myself out. She was going to watch me do what used to be her job, and the job that she has, which is watching me do what her job was, will soon be outmoded. So she is working to make herself obsolete, and I'm working for nothing. I feel like calling up Sobeys and say, "Good evening. I just packed all my groceries. I want $20." Look at all this self-help stuff, self-serve stuff. Gas, of course. The Home Depot has these things now. We're supposed to create our own retirement plans or our pensions anymore. Why haven't we noticed that we're getting worked to death? That work is getting downloaded on us so that they can cut employment, so that Sobeys will hire half the people because they've extracted the labor from the shoppers. And it's a pain in the neck. I have to scan all these things, and as I said, I don't want to take someone else's job. So that is a very postmodern scenario that I just gave you about Sobeys, and it's linked to capitalism, because as anyone who saw my Modern Time lectures will recognize is that I'm working on the assembly line now so that less people can work on the assembly line. And these services are getting cut all the time. You can't get anyone on the phone, obviously, because that costs too much. So you get a mechanical voice that gives you 27 options to hang up, as far as I can tell. And this isn't a coincidence, because the move, if we move from faith to science, and science, the faith in science gets shattered first in World War I, it gets shattered again in World War II, because the science that created or will create nuclear energy factories, also created nuclear bombs. So that it isn't the science that was good or bad, but one application of nuclear fission can power a city. Another application of it can destroy the city in less than a second. In the case of Hiroshima, 60,000 people obliterated in a second, less than a second. So the same scientific principle of nuclear fission can either bring electricity into the homes of thousands of people or destroy them all. So that, what in a way, what humankind keeps discovering is that we are the problem. We keep acting like we're the ones who solve the problem. We create the problems, and then we create the solutions to them, and then we pat ourselves on the back without noticing that we're the ones who created the problem. We're hoping technology will save us from global warming. Well, what caused global warming? Technology. So far, technology has been able to pull it off. It keeps saving us from ourselves. It keeps saving us from technology. Saves us from technology. And the Victorian era was incredibly polluted. There were open sewers. There were cholera epidemics all the time. We got modern hygiene. We got modern plumbing. I mean, obviously a huge advance, quote unquote. But we just keep kicking the can down the road. That technology creates pollution, and then technology looks for innovative ways to contain pollution. But it keeps racketing up. And I'm not sure in the end that technology can solve the problem of itself. That's a postmodern issue. It's a paradox. There's a lot of paradoxes in postmodernism. We create a sense of self to protect ourselves from a sense of aimlessness. We look to the self to be a functioning unit with a commodity culture that can both earn and consume. And the earning and the consuming is created increasingly in such a way, especially with commodities, to give us a sense of purpose and identity. You deserve a break today. So the fast food people will say, how do they know who you are? How do they know you deserve a break? How is fast food a break? And how is food even fast? This is that whole issue of time. Does eating a Big Mac give you more time? No. It means you've done your meal faster. So what? You still got the problem of distance. So one thing that our current postmodern culture up till now tends to do is it keeps trying to say that doing is being. Doing is not being. You have to be to do, but to do is not the sum total of being. It's only one part of being. But because being is too hard to answer, why do we exist? We'd rather say, what do we do? I mean, at cocktail parties, people come up to me and say, what do you do? They don't say, what does it mean that you exist? I like to do that sometimes, just to shake things up. But we can deliberately confuse doing for being. And the reason, the only time we become aware of this is when we're waiting. Because when we're waiting, we're not doing. So that means we're nothing but being. And we can really resent somebody making us wait. Like, I got things to do. Where have you been? You said you'd be here half an hour ago. I have not existed for 30 minutes, and it's your fault. Not only that, but I had to sit here not wondering about my non-existence or my existence with nothing to prove one way or the other. I had nothing to do. So that's why it's called waiting for Godot, because waiting, we're phobic about waiting. Nobody wants to wait. You keep getting these ads for download times. Google will answer something and says, this took 0.7 seconds. Sorry to make you wait. Our cars are rolling entertainment systems because our highways are jammed, and the traffic jam feels a little less like waiting if we have surround sound and climate control and all this kind of delusional power. We're stuck on the Don Valley Parkway. Distracting yourself is simply, and look at the way that phrase works, distracting yourself from what? It's yourself. What are you supposed to distract it with? Well, we distract it with something that makes us not aware that we're waiting. Because in fact, to live is to wait. For the only thing that we're all waiting for, death. And I'm not saying we're not waiting for death and like, yay, we have a date, but to be alive is to wait for death, which is why we don't like to think about waiting. Because when you're waiting, you're going to start to wonder, what does it mean that I'm living? And doing does not mean you've stopped waiting for death. It means you've stopped being aware that you're waiting for death. Because so that's why we're so in love with doing. I'm so busy. I'm crazy busy. I'm so busy. We love to go on and on about how much we have to do. It makes us feel better. How could we die when we have so much to do? So waiting is an awareness of being brought on by an absence of doing. This is why waiting rooms are nearly psychotically appointed. They have aquariums, they have large screen TV, they have toys for the children, they have magazines for the adults. They might as well have a circus because you're waiting. God forbid that you should be aware that you're waiting. And why? Because we don't know how to wait. We don't know what to do. When we don't have anything to do, we don't know what to do, which means that we can only be. And that's just, there's almost no provision in modern life for what you're supposed to do with being. It's all based on doing. Time is money. No, it isn't. I already told you there's no such thing as time. Really no such thing as money either. Money is just debt from labor. It's a piece of paper. It's psychotic to think that two pieces of paper, one can be worth $100 and the other can be worth $5 because someone stamped a number on it. They're both pieces of paper. Offer a 3-year-old a $5 bill and a loonie, they're going to take the loonie, and everyone laughs, ha ha, and then they explain this piece of paper is worth more than that shiny coin. And I think the kid's justified in saying, what a moron. And it's loonies, and literally the loonie costs more to make than the piece of paper. And then we're told that same piece of paper is $100. It's $500. It's paper, and it's also not. So that example I just gave you shows that we have a new form of faith, economics. This was our new dominant discourse, our new faith is economics. It isn't science anymore. And in fact, science is now in the service of economics. It's very hard, I know this because I'm in academia, it's very hard to get a grant, my scientist friends, unless you can also point to the possibility of having a marketable outcome. Now, I'm not saying they'll never fund you if your research isn't obviously heading toward a product, so that all academic scientists don't have to be market and researching, but it helps. So if you are working in chemistry or organic chemistry, and you can even suggest that there might be a new antidepressant in the work that you're doing, you'll get grants. But this also puts pressure because now academic science is no longer pure. It's hooked up with the market, and there's increasing conflict of interest that, let's say your scientific research does lead to a new depressant, but let's say that the side effects aren't as clear as one would like. Now you're under pressure to not undercut your own new invention by looking at the cautionary part of it, or even if you have the integrity as a scientist to say, look, this could be an antidepressant, except we haven't figured this part out, and that's dangerous. It can be taken away from you and offered to someone else with less scruples, who will go on and see if they can't get this to market. So the pressure on scientists to work in a domain where you can see the connection to what you're learning with what product it will create, it's kind of evacuating the more pure science where you simply pursue laws of physics because laws of physics, not because of a new widget that somebody wants to sell on the open market. So going to other examples of going from modern to postmodern is there already had been a shift away from community toward the individual, And as we move from the theological to the scientific, there's an increasing emphasis on the individual, the atomic, not just atoms, but people as atoms. I mean, in the theological era, we had like 4 elements, like earth, wind, fire. Now we have the periodic table. It's like 106, is it 112? They keep adding periodic elements that can exist for 1/1,000,000th of a second if you blast them 5 billion miles an hour into a wall, or so I'm told. But what does that mean? The difference between having just a bunch of self-evident elements, fire, water, wind, and earth. And we see this in the shows that we love, like Game of Thrones, where they're still they're run by this 4 elemental system. Now we've got like 112, and this gives us an incredible precision. We can combine, we can create plastic, and I don't know, endless. It's obviously it's astonishingly brilliant division based on neutrons and protons and noble gases and how reactive elements are with other elements, and it gives us enormous insight into how things react in relation to other things, but it atomizes everything. So, and as people, the self is a much more atomized construct than the soul. The soul was communal. We all had one. It was all this. It was a unique soul, but it was, as soul, it was the same as every other soul. It was a connection to God. Now we have individualism. What kind of car do you drive? What kind of cover do you put on your Apple phone? Do you change it every day? Do you make it match your shoes? How do you announce your individuality? Well, you turn to the marketplace, and another major paradox of postmodernism. You are trying to advertise your individualism with mass-produced products. That cover on your iPhone, which says, "This is me," they made thousands of them. How can that be you? You may not bump into someone who has the same one, because they'll make 5,000 colors, 5,000 patterns. They'll do the same thing with perfume, with deodorant, with cologne. It's marketed as unique, but it is mass-produced, mass-advertised, mass-consumed, which is why we can never feel stable about announcing our uniqueness with mass-produced products. And yet there's virtually no other way offered to us anymore. And this gets back to our phobia about waiting, because another way to, in addition to doing, consuming is a form of doing that creates an aura of persistence in ourselves. So if you go shopping, on one hand, you seem to be doing something, but really what you're doing is trying to surround yourself with enough things so that you will have an aura of doing that will protect you from a sense of being, even when you're waiting. I mean, we all have seen people. What do people do when they're waiting, even to cross the street in a crosswalk? They check their iPhone. Their thumb starts going. They dash out a message, and you didn't have to wait for the light to turn green. Well, you did, but you were able to remain unaware of that. So let me give you an even more. And let me give you 4 versions of the Cartesian "I think, therefore I am." So before Descartes, the expression probably would have run something like, "I believe, therefore I am saved by a transcendent, all-knowing, omniscient, all-loving being." Descartes came along and said, it's not "I believe, therefore I am saved." It's "I think, therefore I am." Although what Descartes said just before that is, "The only thing I'm certain of is doubt." Now that's postmodern, weirdly enough. The only thing I'm certain of is doubt. That's classic postmodern paradox. But Descartes actually goes from the postmodern backwards to the modern by dropping out doubt and just saying "I think." What he meant was, I doubt, therefore I am. I know that I'm not sure. Somebody must know they're not sure. That somebody must be me. So I am because I don't know. I am because I don't know. And science, in a way, does we keep thinking of science as something that knows. Science is something that doesn't know. That's what science is. At the cutting edge of science is a not knowing. That's why you do another experiment. Okay, so we know this, or we think we do. We better do this other experiment to know something else, or to check what we think we know from a different perspective. It never ends. Science is driven by not what we don't know, not by what we know. Once science knows something, it loses interest, passes it off to the market, or to people who are learning about science. The cutting edge of science is always a not knowing. That's what a hypothesis is. That's a I think, but I don't know. And then you check your hypothesis. So you go from I believe, therefore I am sacred, to I think, therefore I am. And then commodity culture steps in and offers a form of identity based on how you consume. And so the artist Barbara Kruger rather famously did a graphic of a hand holding something in the shape of a credit card, and it said, "I shop, therefore I am." That's the turn toward the postmodern, where who you are is what you do. And what you do is advertised by how you consume. So shopping is now instead of doing being presented as the equivalent of being, shopping is presented as the equivalent of being. I saw an ad on a bus the other day, and it said, "Center yourself at the Scarborough Town Center." Like the Scarborough Town Center was a Buddhist monastery. You don't center yourself at the Scarborough Town Center. I feel vaguely psychotic when I'm in the Scarborough Town Center and in the Eaton Center. It's way too much for me. For somebody who makes their living analyzing popular culture, it's madness for me to go into the malls. Way too much. It's because everything is significant to me, not because they're advertising Gap khakis, because I'm wondering why they would call a store the Gap, except that their clothing fills a void. This is why no one wants to shop with me, which is fine. I don't mind. My kids won't shop with me. They don't want to hear about the intrusion of capitalism as a driver of anxiety and depression. They're like, going shopping with you is hell. Yeah, I agree. There is something hellish. It's a kind of a hellscape for me. And I'm sure as hell not going to center myself at a town center. There is no center in the Scarborough Town Center. That's how it works. Malls increase your sense of decenteredness so that you consume more avidly, because your sense of being decentered has been aggravated. But by all means, enjoy your next, if you ever do go shopping again, since now it's, you're risking death through COVID to go into a crowd and mill around. Beckett says something that pushes back against, now he never saw the Kruger thing, "I shop, therefore I am," because she did that in 1980 and Beckett wrote Godot in the 50s. But like most geniuses, Beckett could get at the base of things. And he wouldn't have necessarily disagreed with Kruger when she said, "I shop, therefore I am." But he would have said, well, that's the fantasy. The reality is, and this is how he changed Descartes, "I suffer, therefore I may be." Not I think, not I believe, therefore I'm saved. Not I think, therefore I am. Not I shop, therefore I am. But I suffer, not thinking, not shopping, and not believing. Suffering. And we can see when Beckett says that believing, thinking, and shopping are all attempts to cope with suffering. So what Beckett has done is says, what's behind believing, thinking, and shopping? Suffering. So what's the point of believing, thinking, and shopping? All three of them are coping mechanisms for suffering. So suffering is the underlying feature. And in a way, and he said, that's what being is. Being is suffering. Now that sounds really depressing, but I don't think it's quite as depressing as it immediately comes about. The most authentic thing is suffering. It's not believing, it's not thinking, it's not shopping, it's suffering, because pain is not anything that we willingly generate. And Beckett's not saying, so let's just all be in pain rest of our life. What he's saying is, let's stop covering over the suffering with things that don't address it. That's the point I was just trying to make with the antidepressants. So let's not just cover up the symptom. To live is, to some degree, is to suffer, because living is also loss. You lose loved ones lose you. I mean, you may encounter this with a pet fish or a cat or a dog, but then eventually it's a grandparent, could be a partner. This is suffering. But the reason it's suffering is that it's also living. As Alexander Pope famously said, better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. But he didn't say he's saying something similar to Beckett. Like, one way to avoid suffering from the loss of love would be to never love, but that would also be to never live. So Pope is telling us, you're going to get hurt when you love. That's the game. That's why you're here. You're here to have both the joy of something and the suffering of loss. So the problem with the postmodern age is it's really picking up on a fantasy that was begun at the modern age, which is technology will eliminate suffering. Medicine, and to some degree, to a certain degree, they can make claims about this. Obviously, cancer research and CAT scans, and these are advances. They didn't have this stuff. People are living longer. Things that would have killed people before are either being cured or forestalled, and science can take credit and should take credit and deserves credit for that. But it hasn't solved mortality. It's postponed it. That's different. And we get all the things we're offered to mask our suffering, allow our suffering to take root even more, because they're all distractions and they're all diversions, and can work, but only for a little while. And when they stop working, the suffering is even more aggravated because it's been ignored. Suffering is like a toddler. If you ignore a toddler in a supermarket, eventually they're screaming and pulling candy off the shelves and creating a scene that makes the whole. Yeah, I'm talking from personal experience. So ignoring toddlers is dangerous. It gets worse. Ignoring suffering is similar. The suffering gets more and more persistent. Even physical symptoms, like your back's a little sore because you're sitting, you're like, oh well, and you do it the next day, and 4 days later, it's like it really, really hurts. And it's almost like the body is saying, like, dude, what do I have to do to get your attention? Do I have to just shut down? Do I have to just let you wake up one day and you can't get out of bed? Then will you start to pay attention? So physical pain is a form of suffering. But emotional pain works the same way. If you ignore something that is slowly aggravating a physical pain, the pain will get worse and worse until you start to look at it. Now, obviously, if it's terminal cancer or something, you don't have the ability to turn it back. But if it's a sore back because you really need to try and do some yoga and walk around and not sit all the time, you can walk it back. But we're, as a community, as a society, we don't offer much support anymore for investigating our suffering, because the suffering is also the most authentic source of information. If you tell someone my back is sore, I wonder if it's the way I'm sitting, they say, oh no, it can't be because you've got a new ergonomic chair. Your back's still going to hurt. I mean, you're not going to be able to talk your back out of it. You need to pay attention to your suffering, not other people's interpretation of why it's not suffering. The modern age is an age of anxiety. The postmodern age is an age of depression, because depression is creating a fog machine to cover over the source code of your suffering. I mean, if any computer science majors out there, it's like you're gonna have to get back to the source code of the problem if you want to. Suffering that's ignored will eventually turn into depression, which is a form of suffering, but it's a much worse form because it's uninformative. Actual suffering informs you. It's painful, but it informs you. It informs you through the pain. Depression makes you suffer all day long and you don't learn anything. Anxiety makes you suffer and you don't learn anything. So about yourself or about others or about how others are affecting you. Going back to that meme, anxious, depressed, maybe it's capitalism. Maybe it's a relationship. You know, we adapt creatively to situations and relationships that are important to us or that we feel we can't avoid. Sometimes we pay a price, and we're more willing to suffer the symptoms of continuing to exist in a dysfunctional context than challenging the context, challenging a parent, challenging a partner, challenging a boss, challenging an idea, a politician, etc. That's hard. It's hard to do, and it's a little scary because we are structuralist beings now. Our sense of being is contained by the structures around us, so we're very hesitant to challenge the structures. Because if you challenge a relationship and you find out you're right, like they are seeing someone else, part of you is going to be sorry that you asked. Maybe eventually you'll be glad, but initially you're going to be like, seriously, that is happening? So now my relationship just fell down and I've got no support and no structure and I don't know who I am. I'm going to have to go shopping. It's not going to help. The impulse retail therapy is a thing. I mean, that's a phrase. Going shopping as a form of therapy. It's not a form of therapy. It's a form of, again, covering over suffering. So you don't have to experience it, but at the same time, you don't get any of the information that the suffering contains. So we're in an economic world, and that means we're in a political world because we're in a geopolitical economic. They're inextricable. All of you who saw the events of the Capitol being stormed this past Wednesday. That's one of those incredible moments where the nexus point of the political, the economic, and the personal flash out. The rioters their sense of who they are has been granted them by the cult of Trump's personality. Trump lost the election. He said he didn't. It's easier to believe that he can't be wrong than to give up the sense of purpose that he gave so many people who gave over the struggle of who they are to him. There's a moment Waiting for Godot where these two tramps are talking, and one of them says to the other tramp, "What happened to our rights? They took our rights away?" And the other tramp says, "We gave them away." That's the Trump base. They gave their rights to Trump. They have no rights other than what Trump grants them. They have no choice than to do what Trump tells them. So there's no question he incited the riot. He didn't have to be that explicit, although he was explicit enough. Take back the country, by which he meant get me reelected, or I can no longer make you feel like you matter. Because, you know, the so-called Trump base is profoundly disenfranchised, and they're treated very badly. Now, it's very hard for me to have a lot of sympathy for the rioters, but on a certain level, I do. What I don't respect is the way they've given their rights away to a cult leader and become zombies. And man, when they were scaling that Capitol, if I'd come in the room, I would have assumed I was watching a zombie movie. They were just literally climbing up the walls, and they were getting in there through the mass hysteria that was pushing them. It was like literally was a zombie movie, which means a zombie movie is one of our postmodern tropes. We used to have vampires, but vampires were individuals still. Zombies are mindless, and what's terrifying about zombies is not that they're out to get us, but that we are them. Shoppers mobbing a mall on Black Friday looks like a zombie movie. People climbing the Capitol urged on by a cult leader. Looks like a zombie movie. Because it is. Zombies consume and they've consumed for so long that they no longer know how to be. I mean, the major paradox of a zombie is if it's dead, why is it walking? Well, because it's not dead, but it also doesn't know what it means to be except to consume. So all it does is walk down the street eating people. I never understood why, if zombies were hungry, why they don't eat each other. But I guess I do understand. A zombie can't eat another zombie because the illusion that the next thing you consume from the market, Coke, is it. That doesn't come from other zombies. When you're shopping, you don't get your sense of being from the other shoppers. So your shoppers don't eat, shoppers don't buy shoppers. Shoppers shop. And sometimes they fight over the same widescreen TV or something. But shoppers can't eat shoppers because shoppers are trying to eat something that will make them feel like they are. And this is explicit in Dawn of the Dead, the second zombie movie, where they congregate in a shopping mall. And one of the scientists says, why do they come here? And they said, we don't know. There seems to be some primitive impulse where they go to the last place where they felt sacred or felt whole. So zombies wander toward shopping centers to get centered. Well, we can see how that's working out. So the problem with living in a political world is that there's very little traction anymore in social relationship. As I said, shoppers ignore other shoppers. We get in elevators, we ignore other people in the elevator. We get in subways, we ignore other people in the subways. We're atomistic, we're atomized, we're consumers, we're zombies. We don't relate laterally. We only relate pursuing myths of perfection and innovation that are offered up by the marketplace. So Bob Dylan, and I played one of his songs last semester. He has another song. Now, this song was written in 1991 or 2, quite a while ago. It's actually called We Live in a Political World. But Dylan, like a lot of great artists, it doesn't matter that this song is, almost 40 years old, 30 or 40 years old. It seems, Dylan could have written this yesterday in response to the storming of the Capitol. Because Dylan is like other great artists, he gets at the source code of things. He doesn't get distracted by the current events. So Dylan wouldn't be necessarily want to talk about the storming of the Capitol, and he wouldn't necessarily ask, why did the Capitol get stormed? He's more interested in, they stormed the Bastille in the French Revolution. People storm things, and Dylan's more interested in why than what the particular storming was. So I can't play if I play this song, it might flag my tape. So I'm going to sort of sing it. You'll have to bear with me. And by the way, though, I do have certain credibility as a rock star. When I was at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, as an undergraduate, there was a guy who was taking courses just, I think, for a semester or two at the Rhode Island School of Design, also in Providence. So he and I and 3 other people shared a really rundown, beaten up place one summer. And his name was David Byrne. And I actually sang was not the Talking Heads, but I did sing in one of his, I don't know what you'd call it, one of his garage rock bands. He, of course, stumbled onto obscurity in the Talking Heads, and I became a famous professor. So anyway, there's a little bit of rock history. I'm beginning to think that story, that fact that I was a roommate of Burns, or housemate really, is losing its punch because people are going to start to say who are the Talking Heads. But look them up. Anyway, so here's Dylan. Now I'm going to have to tap this out a little, because I don't have any accompaniment. We live in a political world. Love don't have any place. We're living in times when men commit crimes and crime don't have a face. We live in a political world. Icicles hanging down. Wedding bells ring and angels sing and clouds cover up the ground. We live in a political world. Wisdom is thrown in jail. It rots in a cell, is misguided as hell, leaving no one to pick up the trail. We live in a political world where mercy walks the plank. Life is in mirrors, death disappears up the steps into the nearest bank. We live in a political world. Courage is a thing of the past. Houses are haunted, children unwanted. The next day could be your last. We live in a political world, no one we can see and feel, but there's no one to check. It's all a stack deck. We all know for sure that it's real. We live in a political world. The cities are lonesome with fear. Little by little you turn in the middle, but you're never sure why you're here. We live in a political world under the microscope. You can travel anywhere, hang yourself there. You always got more than enough rope. We live in a political world, turning and thrashing about. As soon as you're awake, you're trained to take what looks like the easy way out. We live in a political world where peace is not welcome at all. It's turned away from the door to wander some more or put up against the wall. We live in a political world. Everything hurts and hits. Climb into the flame, shout God's name, but you're not even sure what it is. Thank you very much. So the lyrics are in the notes, and I also did a link so you can hear Dylan perform it with a full band. But let's back up and look at some of the common denominators. I played R.A.M.'s song, Losing My Religion, in the previous class, but this is more of a postmodern song than Losing My Religion, because Losing My Religion is anxious about losing the religion. Here, Dylan is basically saying we are now in a world where the only thing that matters is your power in relation to other things. Either other things power over you or your power over other things. Everything is power because politics is the distribution of power. Just like economics is the distribution of wealth, and the two go hand in hand because having a certain amount of wealth increases your capacity to distribute power through the political. So love doesn't have any place. We're living in times where men commit crimes and crime doesn't have a face. But we see that lots of, you can have petty crimes, as Dylan also says, steal a little and they throw you in jail, steal a lot and they make you king. The Trump era seems to bear this out. The kind of crimes that we keep trying to figure out don't seem to have a face. Did Trump incite a riot? Yeah, I would say. Is anyone going to be able to, is he going to face any consequences for that? I'm not, quite possibly not. He hasn't his whole life. So part of postmodernism is you can no longer find the connection between crime and a consequence. Crimes, white collar crimes, as they might be called, financial collapses because of greed. In 2008, the entire world economy fell and not a single person was arrested. Billions and billions, trillions probably, was being stolen one way or the other. There was a disconnect. We don't feel a direct connection to the money in our pocket or the job that we do, or the people we meet, or the politicians that say they're looking out for us. So one thing about the Trump base, I think, is Trump is their Godot, and he's arrived, and they'll do anything to stop him leaving. They don't want to go back to being like the tramps that you're going to see in Beckett's play, where they just keep waiting in an agony of a sense of being that's overwhelming because they have no capacity for coping with it. And this is not a criticism of but so many people in the Trump phase are unemployed, and it's not necessarily because they're lazy or incompetent. It's they can't find jobs, or if they do, they pay next to nothing, and they need to have, say, 3 jobs. But there's a lot of unemployment, and Trump was able to say, well, that's because Mexicans took your job, so we're going to build a wall and throw them all out, and you'll have jobs. Trump makes the geopolitical world look like something he can control. He has zero control over it. He certainly couldn't control even nominally the spread of the coronavirus. So wisdom is thrown in jail. Wisdom is not very profitable because wisdom is inextricable from integrity. Integrity is a liability in modernity because it slows down production to be concerned about the possible effects. Mercy walks the plank. Life is in mirrors. And probably my favorite line, death disappears up the steps into the nearest bank. It's a remarkable line. Some of you will know from last semester that, you know, we are still mining conflict minerals in the Congo for our cell phones, and people are dying. Warlords, children are being enslaved to work for essentially our cell phones. So there's a way in which death is converted into capital, and the capital, by the time it shows up in the bank, doesn't look like death anymore. We used to, what we call them, blood diamonds. If anyone you saw that Leonardo DiCaprio movie, which wasn't too bad, but many of the diamonds also finance warlords and child soldiers and some of the things that we saw in that movie too. So one of the worst things about modernity is the way that it harvests people to generate capital. And it can do that literally, as in killing them. But even if it doesn't kill them, it can dramatically diminish their lifestyle, their livelihood. So that capital, I mean, capital is not money. Capital is excess money where they can then make money because it is money. Coke is it. Money is it. Money makes money. The only real money being made anymore is by money. Simply, you guys know this from your summer jobs. Working a job where you're actually there, standing up, that's $10 an hour. But Jeff Bezos made $150 billion last year. Have I got that right? I think it's in the billions. Doing what? Most of it is his stock. Amazon went through the roof because the coronavirus shut down shopping. You could only shop by mail. Amazon became the world's shopping center, and Bezos is the richest man in the world now. What do you do when you're worth? I think he's worth $185 billion. What does that even mean? And this isn't even a moral judgment. Just the thing that's kind of scary about capital is it has no reason for being except that it is. And I think that may be why the age of economics has become our new religion. Because wealth seems to be like grace. Like if you get more of it, then that means you're more graced somehow. That God loves you because you've got more money. But the problem is that there's no there. Right? What's the difference between $1 billion and $185 billion in your wallet? If we can even imagine what that means, you can't spend that kind of money. All that kind of money can do is make more money. It's more like a virus than a counting system. And meanwhile, it's not just that much money accrues to a single person, but we have so many people below the poverty line who can't pay their rent or eat and go to food banks. So courage is a thing of the past. Houses are haunted, children unwanted. The next day could be your last. And then there's this whole issue of perspective. The political world is a world of mirrors. The one we can see and feel. You can see and feel the world. But then he says there's no one to check. It's all a stacked deck. We only know for sure it's real. Now this really reminds me of the Trump era, because now everything is fake news, post-fact, alternative facts. Now, it's not that this hasn't been the case before, but we used to have systems, not symptoms. Now we have symptoms. We've moved from systems to symptoms. And symptoms, by definition, cloak their meaning. They're meant to not be decipherable. So political systems are more increasingly are just symptoms. We don't know what they mean. We don't know what these speeches mean. We don't know who to trust. We don't know what a fact is. Maybe there's never been facts, but there used to be more agreed upon systems for what we were going to, through consensus, decide would be the current facts. We don't seem to have that anymore. Travel anywhere and hang yourself there, you get more than enough rope. Kind of, this is Dylan's kind of looking at this illusion of freedom, the freedom of the shopper, the freedom of the consumer. Everything is for you. We do it your way. We do it all for you. They don't at all. That you they're talking about is a you they create and then sell to you. It's not who. It's not you. It's their version of you. And if you give up your rights, then it can give you a sense of having been organized. Peace is not welcome at all, to the degree to which capitalism thrives on conflict. And there's even a term now called crisis capitalism, that for capitalism, crisis is always opportunity. When New Orleans flooded quite a few years ago, this was a boon for people who'd been wanting to alter this New Orleans, but couldn't, because it would have involved moving people around as though it were a concentration camp. But when the floods came in and wiped out parts of New Orleans, then the developers were able to go in and create out of the clean slate. The Iraq War was a crisis that was also a huge boom for developers. You go in and invade a nation and flatten it, you then get to go in and build. You get to rebuild it. This is how wars can be so profitable. I mean, Hitler pulled Germany out of the worst modern economy anyone had ever seen by declaring war on the world and building a military machine that moved from country to country, enslaving people to put even more labor into his war machine. The problem is that these things can never end well. In a way, there was no way that Hitler was ever going to take over the world. The question was only how much of the world he was going to destroy before he himself was destroyed. There's no backing up. And if someone like Trump had free access to do all the things he wants to be able to do without accountability and without consequence, a lot of destruction, way more than we saw on Wednesday, would happen. He eventually would burn out. There's no way to sustain it, but he would have destroyed a lot. Winston Churchill said, fascists ride on tigers that they are afraid to dismount. You've got this tiger, look really powerful, but all you can do now is invade the next country. You can't sustain. You can only go forward until you're burned out. So I'm conscious of the time here, but there's two poems. Now, last semester we took a hard look at Dover Beach, written in 1868, and in 1968. Another poem was written by Anthony Hecht, which he called the Dover Bitch. And I've put them both in the notes, and I've discussed them there. And what's interesting is Dover Beach is the beginning of modern anxiety, and Dover Bitch is postmodern depression. So what's brilliant about Dover Bitch is it harkens back to Dover Beach to show how the anxiety of the modern age has become the depression of the current age. So let me suggest what I mean here, and you can look at the whole poem later. But Arnold will talk about how the sea of faith was once at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. So Arnold's metaphor for the diminishment of faith is the ocean. It's that moment where the wave goes back, and the water, which had covered the pebbles and the rocks and the seaweed and maybe the garbage, see what's underneath the water, and then theoretically the water comes back. But in Arnold's image of the diminishment of faith, the entire ocean just backs up into a vanishing point. So all we're left with is this debris, and nothing. The wave doesn't come back anymore. And this is terrifying to Arnold. And he turns to the woman that he's with, and in a desperate attempt to find a new system, because he can no longer can believe in transcendental certitude. He needs to believe in personal commitment. So he turns to the woman he's with and says, "Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night." So Hecht starts the poem "The Dover Bitch" in this conversational form. That's the first thing we might want to notice. There's no effort on the part of Anthony Hecht to show a bird's eye view of what life is. And Arnold's struggling, like, I thought the world meant something. The world doesn't mean anything. So let's make our relationship mean everything. This desperation to find a system because the other system has crumbled. In postmodernism, the system is to give up on systems, just to realize they're all constructs. That doesn't mean it's good. Existentialism is still confusion and chaos, but it's an authentic confusion and chaos. And the existentialists argue that the authentic life is the life that admits that order is simply a rearrangement of chaos. Order is still chaos. Order is chaos rearranged so it doesn't look like chaos. That's what a system is. And Samuel Beckett will say, my challenge in writing Waiting for Godot was to show the chaos for what it is and not pretend that it's something else. So it's kind of terrifying, but it's authentic. And the problem is that if you face the authenticity of a meaningless world and realize that the only time anything means anything is the result of a system which is simply a chaos rearranged to look orderly, then nothing is certain, and all things are subject to, as we say, deconstruction. So what Hecht does is, well, so let's just chat about it, and the poem begins. So there stood Matthew Arnold and this girl at the cliffs of England, crumbling away behind them. He said to her, "Try to be true to me, and I'll do the same for you, for things are bad all over, etc., etc." Well, now, I knew this girl. It's true, she had read Sophocles in a fairly good translation and caught that bitter allusion to the sea, but all the time he was talking, she had in mind the notion of what his whiskers would feel like on the back of his neck. She told me later on that after a while, she got to looking out at the lights across the channel and really felt sad. So there's more, but where Hecht has brought us first is the poet apparently met the woman in the poem Dover Beach, who had been with this anxious guy named Matthew Arnold, and she's kind of complaining about it. Now that's not in Matthew Arnold's poem. We don't know what she's thinking. We only know what he needs her to be for him. Let us be true to one another. We don't know that she's feeling this despair. He's feeling it, and he's turning to her as a possible antidote to that. And what we learned from Hecht, who ran into this girl later, is, she's kind of like, why are we in this hotel? Why did we come here? She's looking for more than angst. At least according to Hecht, he's trying to figure out what was that woman thinking in Dover Beach. Why would she go to a hotel with this guy? Probably because she's hoping for a relationship. Are they married? Are they hoping? Is she hoping that they get married? What does this be true to one another mean? Is he proposing? Is this marriage? What's he asking? And according to Hecht, the woman's probably looking for some kind of security, some kind of commitment, which he gives, but only in terms of his own anxiety. Like, let's be true to one another because I'm nervous. It's not much of a marriage proposal. Let's get married because I'm anxious. It wouldn't necessarily fill you with confidence. So she told me later on, she got to, and that's where the depression comes in, feeling sad. Although feeling sad is better than being depressed, because at least you have some idea why. But look at why she's feeling sad. And this is more, this is why this is more like depression. She really felt sad thinking of all the wine and enormous beds and blandishments in French and the perfumes. And then she got really angry. So if you're standing on Dover Beach, looking across the Straits of Dover, you're looking at France. So she's sad because she's thinking, what am I doing in this crappy hotel with this weird, anxious guy when I could be in Paris with these with wine and enormous beds? In other words, I could be in a better hotel than this. I could be drinking better wine than this. I could have better distractions than this guy. And in fact, one could argue that, according to Hecht, the woman is kind of like, you're depressing the hell out of me because you're having an existential crisis and you want me to join you. And I came here to drink some good wine and be in a nice hotel, and maybe the relationship would go somewhere. Like, what are why are you dragging me into this existential quagmire? She got really angry to have been brought all the way down from London and then be addressed as a sort of mournful cosmic last resort is really tough on a girl. And she was pretty. This is her thinking, I can do better than this. I'm pretty. I don't have to hang out with this guy. It's just like the Dover Beach is being rewritten as a Tinder date. And she's really sorry that she swiped right. Anyway, she watched him pace the room and finger his watch chain and seemed to sweat a bit. And then she said one or two unprintable things. So in Hecht's rewriting, or rather giving you what happened next in Dover Beach, Arnold says, "Our love, let us be true to one another." And according to Hecht, she turned around and said, "F off. I can't believe you dragged me to this dump. I don't give a damn about your stupid anxieties and your existential, deal with it. That sounds like a you problem." So this is left out entirely of Matthew Arnold's fantasy that the woman will somehow complete him and protect him from his own existential dread. And then he says, but you mustn't judge her by that. What I mean to say is she's really all right. I still see her once in a while, and she always treats me right. So now we've learned, Hecht has had, I guess, booty calls with this woman, and this sort of, he implies that she has more fun with him than she did with Matthew Arnold because they have a good time. But there's still a depression to this because this good time is so cyclical. He hasn't really offered her, Anthony Hecht, or whoever the speaker of the poem is, clearly hasn't offered her any more commitment than Arnold had. It's just he's understood that she just wants to have a nice bed and decent bottle of wine and a chance to forget problems and be distracted. He's down with that, as we say these days, or as my kids say. We have a drink, and I give her a good time. So she always treats me right. I give her a good time. And perhaps it's a year before I see her again. But there she is, running to fat, but dependable as they come. And sometimes I bring her a bottle of Nuit d'Amour. So this in a way is no better. He doesn't really do better with this woman than Arnold. He's rather different with her, but he still seems to think that, where is she in this year? So they go to a hotel, they have a 1 night, 2 night, 3 night stand, and then nothing. And then he calls her up out of the blue because he's in between women or jobs or both, and they hook up again, using your guys' parlance. And that line running to fat is a little bit unkind. It's, well, maybe a lot unkind. She's getting older. There's a way in which her way of coping is beginning to show its limitations. Like does the same thing over and over again. She keeps having fun, or so he thinks, but she's not going anywhere. And in the original poem, in the original moment when she was with Arnold, according to Hecht, she said, "Ed, why is she doing this dumb?" And she was pretty. So then the line running to fat is kind of ominous because if her having a good time whenever she wants is based on how pretty and attractive or sexy, as we all know, those of you who read Dorian Gray, that doesn't last. And what is next for her? It's starting to feel a little lonely. And so Nuit d'Amour is a French perfume. It's not even a very expensive one. It's fairly cheap. And Nuit d'Amour means night of love. So they might as well call this perfume, One Night Stand. Why isn't there a perfume called One Night Stand? I mean, it's pretty obvious. I don't think things would go well if you showed up on a date and gave someone a bottle of perfume called One Night Stand. But what if it was called Nuit d'Amour? Night of love. Same thing. It's just French. So that's all this guy has given her. So there's a depressing circularity, and the lack of systems indicates that there's no way to map progress either in the relationship or in their individual lives. Now I want to finish up. Let me say one more thing about Waiting for Godot. If you've read it already, you might well say, what the hell was the point of this play? Nothing happened. Nothing happens. Nothing happened. Nothing will happen. Nothing has happened. And you're right. This is a play about nothing. And that's really hard play to write. How do you write a play about nothing? Well, it's not easy. Why do you write a play about nothing? Because Beckett doesn't want to figure out what things mean. He wants to find out how things come to mean, because this is the major crux of postmodernism. We now know that meaning is an effective construct. There is no essential meaning to anything. That doesn't mean things aren't better or worse. It just means they're all constructs. Trump's particularly good at constructing a kind of meaning that's patently false, unless you're inside the construct. And so Beckett wrote a play that doesn't mean anything because it's a play about meaning, and that's what it means. That's what Waiting for Godot means, which is, how do things come to mean? We've been fooled too many times by our susceptibility to wanting to be in the presence of an absolute truth. And when you want to be in the presence of an absolute truth, you are a follower looking for a cult leader, because there are no absolute truths. And it can be tiring to live in a world where there are no absolute truths, but at least you're not prey for a liar who comes along and says they know the absolute truth. Our tolerance for incertitude is so low that we follow con artists. Con artists are among the most successful people in the last 20 or 30 years. All the really successful, super rich people are con artists. They're good at selling confidence that they don't actually have, to people who will refuse to see that they don't have it because they're so anxious to possess the illusion that they do. But let me read you, I'm going to jump ahead to one last poem for tonight. And I'll put these three poems in a single printing in the announcements at some point. So you'll have these three poems. This one's called Diving into the Wreck. And I'm offering this this is 1971, so we're jumping ahead from 1950 for a moment. But it's a brilliant poem about how we can still experience life in authentic, life-affirming ways, even if meaning is a construct. The title already starts to suggest that what's important is not progress, because that's another myth, that everything's progressing and everything's becoming more perfect. But so instead of obsessing on moving forward, how about diving into the things that have sunk? How about spending time with our suffering? How about spending time with our loss? Well, obviously, when a ship goes down, it's lost. And usually what you do when a ship goes down is you find a way to move on. Well, not the people in the ship, like the Titanic. 1912, the Titanic went down. And that was another blow to science. That That was the largest ship ever made. It was supposed to be indestructible. It went to the bottom of the ocean on its first voyage. The hubris of science, in a way, I'm not blaming scientists. They thought they'd solved by giving it two hulls, so that the first hull could be ripped. It wouldn't matter because there was a second hull. And somehow they didn't imagine an iceberg that would rip both hulls, which is, what happened. And they were too far away from everything and anything for many of them to be rescued before the entire ship went down. So this sinking, and not just because of Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, the sinking of the Titanic is a defining moment from the early part of the 20th century. Not that it was necessarily understood that way, because you could argue in retrospect that the sinking of the Titanic in 1912 might have warned them what a bloodbath World War I would be, where machinery would create a level of carnage never seen before, and then World War II would double down on that. So Adrienne Rich, the poet, she begins first, having read the book of myths and loaded the camera and checked the edge of the knife blade. I put on the body armor of black rubber, the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. So what she's going to dive down instead of moving forward. So she reads the book of myths. Now that could be the Bible, that could be Wall Street, that could be advertisements, that could be a shopping center. In other words, she's read the book of myths that we turn to give ourselves an idea that we exist. She knows those myths, but that's not what she's interested in. Those myths keep things moving forward, but they don't let you bore down, which of course most of us don't want to do. Waiting is also an unwelcome opportunity to bore down instead of moving on. So when you're waiting for a bus, you're not moving, you're waiting to move, but meanwhile you're not. And so your thoughts tend to start going down, and that can be really uncomfortable. It could potentially be really useful, but not if you're phobic about it. So she's done all that. I put on the flippers, the grave and awkward mask. I am having to do this, not like Cousteau, and Jean-Jacques Cousteau was, you guys may not know much about him, but he's a very famous oceanographer, and he had a television show, I think in the 60s and 70s maybe, that really made oceanography, household name. Sort of like that Neil deGrasse guy, that ability to popularize science, or Bill Nye, the science guy, or that kind of thing. Anyway, I am having to do this not like Cousteau, with his assiduous team aboard the sun-flooded schooner, but here alone. So this is not a scientific dive. And this wreck that she's diving is her own wreck. It's not the Titanic. It's not a marketable dive. A lot of what Cousteau did was finance because people wanted to watch the show while he did his dives, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this is a personal, psychological, this poem, allegory, that she is diving down to explore some of the wrecks of her own life. The things that went down in her life are more valuable than only existing on this on the what she calls the sun-flooded schooner. Most of us would rather stay on the sun-flooded deck, but to stay there all the time is dangerous, because that means you can't learn from your wrecks. And if you don't learn from your wrecks, sooner or later, even though you're on a sun-drenched deck, you will start to feel depressed and detached because you have sailed on from the most important events of your life, which is moments of loss. Nothing wrong with succeeding, but succeeding doesn't teach you much. It's the disappointments, it's the shocks, it's that remind us to try and continue to feel authentic with our suffering, and not in a constant delusional pursuit of a fantastic coherency and certitude. Reading poems is like diving into a wreck, because the poems are hard to read. They seem confusing. They set up roadblocks. That's the point. They're trying to slow you down. Poems make you wait while you're reading. Like, what the hell does this mean? Waiting for Godot makes you wait. It isn't just the tramps who wait 2 hours for Godot, it's the audience. They got nowhere to go. They bought their ticket. I mean, a lot of people left waiting for Godot after Act One. Some of them because they thought it was over. They didn't know there was an Act Two. And some of them who didn't care. They thought it was the worst play they'd ever seen and bordering on fraudulent. There was no plot. They were not entertained. That was Beckett's point. But at least in the early, now everyone knows what they're in for when they go see Godot. But at the time, they were really shocked that someone would have the nerve to write a play that wasn't entertaining, and that its point was to not be entertaining, and it's refused to distract you with an interesting plot or a mystery or some kind of reveal at the end. So then we say there is a ladder. So she's on the sun-drenched schooner, and then she notices the ladder is always there, hanging innocently close to the side of the schooner. We know what it is for, we who have used it. Otherwise, it is a piece of maritime floss, some sundry equipment. So for the people partying on the sun-drenched deck, no one notices this ladder. Now, those from A10 will remember Yeats's famous line, I must begin where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. Well, this is like that, except that instead of starting down at the bottom of the ladder, in postmodernism, we tend to try and stay at the top of the ladder. And so in a way, Adrienne Rich is doing what Yeats said. She's going to go down the ladder to look at the wreck, to look at the rag and bone shop of the heart, not the pretty sun-drenched deck. So I go down, rung after rung, and still the oxygen immerses me, the blue light, the clear atoms of our human air. I go down. My flippers cripple me. I crawl like an insect down the ladder, and there is no one to tell me when the ocean will begin. Now that's a good thing. Notice that she's in an area that's unmapped. And that would normally be a case for panic, but she's going to go where there are no maps. She's read the book of myths. She knows about the maps. She doesn't want the maps. She wants the unmapped. She wants the wreck. So first the air is blue, and then it is bluer, and then green, and then black. I am blacking out, and yet my mask is powerful. It pumps my blood with power. The sea is another story. The sea is not a question of power. She's looking for a world that's not political. She's looking for a world that's not commercial. She's looking to actually get away from the very systems most of us gravitate toward, hoping to organize ourselves. She wants to be unorganized. She wants to be unmapped. She wants to be in an area that the myths don't talk about. The sea is not a question of power. I have to learn alone to turn my body without force in the deep element. So I have to learn alone to turn my body without force, instead of relying on the force of advertising or other things to move your body for you in the deep element. And now it is easy to forget what I came for among so many who have always lived here, swaying their crenellated fans between the reefs. And besides, you breathe differently down here. This is a really interesting moment, because remember she said earlier that the flippers made her awkward and that the mask made her powerful. She's kind of gone into this mermaid mode where it appears she's no longer using flippers and masks. So she stepped out of technology. And obviously in real terms, if you're scuba diving and you take off all your equipment, you would drown. But this is metaphor. And so she's saying, it's kind of like that moment where Luke pushes the computer away from his face and then finally is able to shoot down into the vulnerable spot of the Death Star, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's saying, Luke, trust the Force. I mean, Star Wars is fun gadgets, but it's actually anti-technological. They blow up the Death Star. The Ewoks are much cuter than Darth Vader, and they're just running around with sticks, but they're smart, and they keep defeating the technology because the technology is awkward. The stormtroopers, they're layered up, but by the time they finally defeat the Death Star, and Yoda as well, sitting in his swamp somewhere, they defeat the Death Star by turning away from technology. And of course, because the lasers are a ridiculous weapon, when the stormtroopers seem to have automatic weapons, who needs a flashlight Talk about bringing a knife to a gunfight. But they're Jedis, and as long as they're in touch with the Force, choo, 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 choo. But really, there's a sense. This poem and Star Wars are not so weirdly different, because Lucas is also saying, what if we dive down away from technology? Because Darth Vader clearly gives in to becoming machine, and he's more machine than man until the very end. And when his helmet's lifted off, he's going to die because he can't live without the helmet. And then Luke famously says, I have to save you, and he says, you already have. Meaning, I'm going to die, but I'm going to die having stepped away from the robotic machinery that I kept giving myself over to. So you breathe differently down here. Modernity tells us we need technology to survive, but there's an extent to which technology is making it harder to live. I came to explore the wreck. The words are purposes. The words are maps. I came to see the damage that was done and the treasures that prevail. So this idea that a wreck is equivalent to just damage is wrong. There are events in your painful past that are treasures. I mean, and of course wrecks have treasures too. So go and look at the damage, but see what treasures prevail. I stroked the beam of my lamp slowly along the flank of something more permanent than fish or weed. The thing I came for, the wreck, and not the story of the wreck. Now, this is the pursuit of postmodernism. Can you get behind presentations of things to the thing itself? Sometimes we prefer representations. We prefer that the thing, like Coke is it. We prefer that the it be commodified for us so that it's easily consumed. It's hard to dive into the wreck, to dive behind the representation, to see the thing for what it is. Like that moment in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy discovers that the Wizard of Oz is not a wizard at all. He's just an old man hanging out behind a curtain, which also means he's not going to be able to get her back to Kansas. So she turns away from the technology. I am the great and powerful, and says, you're a terrible man. He says, well, I'm a good man. I'm just a bad wizard. Isn't really true, but that's another. I'll pick that up at some other point. He sent her to almost certain death to fight the Wicked Witch, so I don't think he's a good man. He's a con artist, a very, very powerful con artist. So the Trump is basically the Wizard of Oz, and the machine is starting to literally blow up right in front of us, and his followers can't believe that this all-powerful machine is actually this con artist behind a curtain who essentially can't do anything for anybody, instead of claiming, as he does, that he can do everything for everyone. So the thing I came for, the wreck, and not the story of the wreck, the thing itself and not the myth. The drowned face always staring toward the sun, the evidence of damage worn by salt and sway into this threadbare beauty, the ribs of the disaster curving their assertion among the tentative haunters. This is the place, and I am here, the mermaid, whose dark hair streams black, the merman in his armored body. We circle silently about the wreck. We dive into the hold. I am she, I am he. Now, this poem is 1971, but notice she's also trying to get away from gender binary, something we've been talking about a lot, to not just be either a woman or a man. Those are both positions. Femininity and masculinity are positions in relation to power. They aren't innate. I mean, they may be predicated on a biological body, but they're not essential. So nobody's feminine, nobody's masculine. Those are performances that look to the body to authenticate themselves, but they're not authentic. They're performances. And that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they aren't real, and that you are something behind the performance of your gender. But you're going to be told, you're going to be encouraged to get a lot of sense of identity from how well you perform your gender. Like what kind of woman are you? What kind of a man are you? There was a perfume in the 1950s. Its slogan was, want him to be more of a man? Try being more of a woman. So not only were there, in other words, if he's not performing well, maybe you need to step up your performance, because his performance is dependent, the quality of his performance is dependent on the quality of your performance. And it's women who are encouraged to masquerade, and it's men who are told that they're somehow essential. That to be a man is to be like a rock, whereas to be a woman is to be like some kind of changeling. You can change all the time: mother, daughter, wife, sister, lover, Madonna, whore. You know, all these roles that women are supposed to shapeshift in order to keep men stable and unaware of their own capacity to shapeshift if they aren't able to stay within the performance lines of their gender. So I am she, I am he, whose drowned face sleeps with open eyes, whose breasts still bear the stress, whose silver copper vermeil cargo lies obscurely inside barrels half wedged and left to rot. We are the half-destroyed instruments that once held to a course, the water-eaten log, fouled compass. So notice all the things that map: the compass, the captain's log. They're rotten, they're fouled up, and that's good. Half-destroyed instruments. 10 people will remember the line, "What instruments we have agree that it was dead, it was a cold day." And that was in reference to the death of a poet, who's a special kind of instrument, because poets don't measure and they don't quantify, they qualify, and it's about being, not about doing. Poems are about be. They don't do. They're not instruction manuals. So we are, I am, you are, by cowardice or courage, the one who find our way back to this scene, carrying a knife, a camera, a book of myths, in which our names do not appear. So that takes us back to the first line, having read the book of myths. Now, this is also seen as a poem that is in a feminist mode, because she's also saying that women, 1971, this is the first wave of modern feminism, starting in, say, 66 with the feminine mystique and the female eunuch, Germaine Greer and Betty Friedan. So she was saying that the Book of Myths doesn't really represent women, or if it does, it represents them as temptresses. You know, Eve is the one who got them kicked out of paradise, and she was the one who got seduced by the serpent, like, you know, eat the apple, and then she gave it to Adam, and then he ate it. So it's easy to blame Eve for the fall of mankind, or blame Pandora for opening the box. Women pretty much get blamed for introducing sin into the world in numerous myths. And so this is one of the lessons of postmodernism that we're going to have to look at, is that don't look for your name in dominant discourse. You're not going to find it. It doesn't know your name. It will tell you it knows your name. It will call you by a name it claims is yours, but there's a price for accepting the name the dominant discourse gives you. You know, be a man, be a woman, be this, be that. You see this in advertising a lot, where the product says be something. And I think there's a cologne called Be, or To Be, like must smell like Descartes. I don't know, but the emphasis on being in advertising is not coincidental. But your name is not in the dominant discourse, and the authenticity of your life, to a certain extent, will be to explore the differential between the name that you're given by the dominant discourse and how you actually feel. That is a way to experience the thing itself, and not the story about the thing. All right, I'm going to end here. That was a lot. I hope you're getting something out of that. Look at my notes. Read Waiting for Godot. It's not very long. We'll be kind of spending time with it the next two lectures. Although I'll be bringing in other poems, and check your discussions and stuff, because I may add some film clips. And in fact, I am going to add something for you to look at. I'll give you the link to it, and it's a 17-minute surreal film called En Chien Andalou, and I'll talk about it in relation for Waiting for Godot, because it's really an early attempt to make a film that doesn't mean anything. You're gonna really love me for this, but really we need more things that don't mean anything in order to get the space to figure out how we choose to mean, so that we're not constantly meaning something for other people. Okay, I'm gonna say good night. I'll be here live Wednesday, 11 p.m. I won't have a lecture. I'll have a few thoughts, no doubt, but I'd like you to come with thoughts and questions too, and we'll have a kind of discussion. So yeah, until Wednesday, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you then.